So here's a question that, as a creator, you have to eventually answer when you are dealing with a long-running, successful franchise. And that is, how is your franchise going to end? What's the last chapter? What's the, to use the Marvel equivalent, what's the end game here? Where is the story going, and how do you wrap it up in a nice big bow? Nothing lasts forever. No series lasts forever. Everything is eventually going to have their final episode or their final entry. But how do you do that, especially for a multi-generational, multi-decade running fan favorite series? How do you bring it to a close? Now keep in mind, the Star Trek universe, as contained within the original series, let's just look at the original series right now. This is a very different animal than, say, something like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, or even the original Star Wars films. Because in all of those, there was an end game in mind. There is a point that we are journeying towards. There is one coherent story that has to have its conclusion. But Star Trek wasn't like that. Star Trek was an episodic TV show. There was no Lord Voldemort that needed to be destroyed by the end. There was no one ring that needed to be gotten rid of. There was no Dark Lord that needed redemption. So, when it comes time, which, as we stated, it inevitably must for all properties, how do you wrap everything up? It's more akin to how, if you're looking at the comic books, how do you write the last Spider-Man story? What is the ending of Spider-Man's story? And this was the challenge that was faced with the producers and writers of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Because it was decided that this would be the last film for the original cast. So how do you bring that story to a close? Moreover, they had another challenge in the planning of this, in that by this time, 91, Star Trek The Next Generation was well into its boom period. And it was a huge success. People loved it. So now, not only are you trying to put a bow on the original series, but you're trying to present that bridge into the next series. So how do you do that? How do you compete with all of those opposing forces to create a satisfying product? And we're going to talk about how they did it and what they did and how well it worked. So, let's talk about it. So, starting off, what is the story of the Undiscovered Country? Well, a Klingon moon explodes, thrusting the Klingon Empire into financial and political chaos. The Klingons, who have always been the big bads of the Star Trek universe, now cannot afford to continue hostilities against the Federation, so they reach out in hopes of a peace treaty. Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise is tasked with escorting the leader of the Klingon High Council to Earth for the peace talks. Along the way, the leader of the Klingon Empire is assassinated. Kirk and McCoy are arrested. Now the crew of the Enterprise needs to uncover the mystery of who actually did it. Kirk and McCoy need to escape from a Klingon gulag and stop another political assassination. All of this, in about 2 hours. That's a lot going on. So let's dissect this down and talk about why this film works so well, not just as a movie, but as a final movie, as a goodbye. I think one of the smart things they did is bringing back to the director's chair Nicholas Meyer, who was the genius behind The Wrath of Khan, which we've already discussed as, in my opinion, being the strongest in terms of the Star Trek films. I don't necessarily think it's the best, it's not my favorite, but directorially, it's the one that set the stage. It said, this is what a Star Trek movie should look and feel like. So I think it's a wonderful bit of continuity bringing him back for the 6th film, and we're going to talk about his directorial elements a little bit later on. But for right now, let's stick to basically his and Leonard Nimoy, who was one of the executive producers on the film, their decision about what the story should be about and how well it works. So that little bit of the story that I laid out for you, simple, but it fits every single check that you need. It checks all the boxes on every level. Let's look at it. So from the point of view of this being the last adventure of the next of the original series, what story do you tell? Well, what story is there left to wrap up? Well, the Klingons had always been the bad guys. So why not bring them back into the fold and detail now how do you make peace with the person who's been making your life hell for, 20 some years. Also, just in terms of the Star Trek universe, I don't think they gave a lot of consideration to the Next Generation, which is fine. But when you also consider that from the very first episode of the Next Generation, they established the Klingons were not the bad guys anymore. The Klingons were allies. Worf was there, So this now answers the question how the Klingons went from being our worst enemy to being our friend. So it fits all of that. It wraps up those plot points. It allows us to get some closure on plot points we didn't really tackle before or give much credence to. One of the things I meant to mention and kind of forgot in my Star Trek 3 review is I mentioned the death of Kirk's son, David, but the death of his son is just very glossed over and forgotten almost immediately. Kirk has his, William Shatner overacting moment, and then it's almost completely dropped. It's like, oh, Spock's back, that's all I really care about. So we bring back that plot point and say, no, now we got to deal with what are the emotional ramifications of this. So I think this story gave them a great opportunity to just put a bow on everything in a nice, clean way. The story works very well from another angle, and it's the angle that Nicholas Meyer and Leonard Nimoy were coming at it when they kind of came up with the idea. Science fiction, at its best, is when a story can take a story about the human condition, be that artistic expression, political expression, the state of the world, what have you. And as Nicholas Myers would kind of put it, take it out of the realm of reality, take it out of that direct contact you have with it, and put it out, as he says, in Klingon land. And now you can look at it from a more objective point of view. That's when science fiction is at its best, and Star Trek is definitely one of the best of science fiction. At the time this movie was being made, the wall, though not literally down, was starting to crumble between America and the then USSR. The Chernobyl had happened. The Russian superpower was exposed for being not as stable as anyone, including them, thought it was. Their economy was a shambles. And for the first time, they had to reach out. And so they, as the Federation and Kirk and the characters of this movie have to deal with, they now have to deal with this concept of this person that I've been maintaining constant hostility towards for the majority of my life now says I need help. And how do you deal with that? Do you trust it? Do you help them? How do you feel about helping? In terms of the greater Star Trek universe, this one did help pave the way a little bit more for a better understanding of the Klingons. And a thing that Star Trek has kind of held to since is that even its worst villains, and you look at the list of alien races that they've created since this, the Cardassians, the Ferengi, the Bajorans, you know, even your worst enemy is not a purely bad person. They have a culture, they have a background, they have philosophical, religious beliefs, and the key is to understand those. And if you can understand those, you have a better chance of understanding the person. And Next Generation had already started toying with that, but we'll see it in later Next Gen and DS9 and Voyager episodes of exploring the person that you see as the villain and understand who they are and why they're that way. You can really see the influences of history in this film. I mean, the Chancellor of the Klingon High Council's name is Gorkon. You know, a direct takeoff of Gorbachev. But they also wanted him to be kind of an outside-the-box thinker, especially for the Klingons as we had seen them up to that point. So they also modeled him very much after Lincoln. If you look at the makeup, he's very Lincoln-esque. He's got a Lincoln beard, chin strap going on there. Because he was supposed to be a peacemaker. And something else they understood about history, sadly, is that men and women who speak out for peace and are constantly trying to bridge the gaps between peoples or countries or whatever, usually end up being assassinated for their troubles. You know, it's a disgusting truth of human history. And they knew that. And that's what led to the story of the assassination. And they also knew that more often than not, the person who does the assassinating is not always someone from the other side, it's someone from your own side. So it deals with those issues. It deals with a lot of the complex emotions that go along with times changing. I think that's a great theme that the film has, is that the times they are changing. And Gorkon has this great line to Kirk, and he says, if there is to be a bold new world, our generation is going to have the hardest time living in it. And that is true. It is a truth of growing older. The world that you grew up in is going to change. And the world that you are comfortable with is going to change. I mean, look at us now within the last 4 years and how much shit has changed. Not always for the better. I'm not saying anything's changed for the better, because it certainly isn't. But that world that we grew up in, that my generation grew up in, that's gone. And it's not coming back. And we now have to deal with how do we adjust to it. Some people can't make the adjustment. And other people say, okay, this is the way it is. We now have to change the way we think and feel and live and whatnot. And as we've seen time and time again, the ones who can't always seem to be the most vocal. So, there you go. So from a political standpoint, this is a great film. I remember when the first of the J.J. Abrams Trek films came out. The Onion, a comedy newspaper, so it's meant as a joke, so I'm not mad about it, just kind of caught my eye, did this article about how great it was that they were doing a Star Trek movie that didn't deal with any, 3-hour political debates. And I remember reading that, and it's a joke, so I wasn't mad, but I was reading it going, well, if you're going to a Star Trek movie and not looking for the deeper political meanings or, you know, the metaphorical elements, you're not seeing a Star Trek movie. Simple as that. This storyline, however, also gives us just something unique within the Star Trek films. This one totally changes up the storyline and what the character's role in the story is. So this is a political film, it's a prison movie, it's a mystery. The Star Trek films have never done a mystery, a whodunit. You know, it's always a, here is the task that has to be achieved, here's the villain in our way or the obstacle in our way, now go do it. This one is much more in the realm of, okay, this has happened, now we got to react to it. And how do we find the evidence? How do we put things together? Now, it's a very easy mystery. If you can't figure out from the minute they step on screen who the bad guys are, who actually did the crime, then that means you have no deductive powers whatsoever. It is so blatantly obvious, you know, from just their appearance to some of the things they say. They're like, okay, their presence at certain points, you're like, all right, you're clearly the bad guy. I mean, come on. We'll talk about that later. So I always look at it more as like a Columbo style mystery. We as the audience know who the villain is. Now we got to watch how do they put the pieces together. And it's done really well. It's a fascinating little mystery, and the way they piece it together and the things they do is really engaging. Coming to that, it's sad that this is the last one for them, and this is when they decided to do this, but better late than never, I suppose. This is the first one of these films that I truly felt was an ensemble piece. You know? That the whole, again, probably because it was the last one, so they wanted to make sure everybody kind of had their glory. Of course, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are the cornerstones of it, but the other characters aren't just there for comic relief. They're not there just going, Captain, they're saying things. You know, they have roles in the film. They contribute to the ultimate solutions, all of them. So it's great to see that. The only one I would say maybe gets a little bit of the short end of that stick is Sulu. But that's because his story has moved forward. Sulu has gone from being, you know, the helmsman, he's now the captain of his own ship. He's the captain of the Excelsior. Which is funny. I always thought it was funny that they never did a series of movies with him and his ship, which it seemed like they were kind of teasing. But for some reason it never happened. However, interestingly enough, they did do an episode of Voyager called Flashback, which kind of fills in the blanks of what Sulu was doing during the events of this movie when he wasn't on screen, which is really cool. I really like that episode. That's a great segue into another great thing this film does and the story allows, because it is the last. This film allows for callbacks and little nods, brings characters back that we haven't seen in a little while, fleshes them out a little bit. And it's everything from big things like Kirk and him dealing with the death of his son and now trying to make peace with the people who murdered his son, to little things like in Star Trek 3 and 4, Sulu had kind of throwaway lines that he thought the Excelsior was an awesome looking ship and he just loved it. Well, now he's the captain. They bring characters back from previous films. The Klingon ambassador from Star Trek 4 is back. Admiral Cartwright, who was also in Star Trek 4, is back in this one, again played by Brock Peters, who would later go on to play Joseph Sisko on Deep Space Nine. This film has a lot of Star Trek's repertory company in it. The DVD has a great little thing about all the actors in this who have done other things for Star Trek. You know, Kirkwood Smith plays the president, and he's played a number of characters. Michael Dorn does a guest spot as Colonel Worf, who is the grandfather of the character he plays on Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. David Warner, who plays Gorkon, of course, was in Star Trek V, and then would play a Cardassian on The Next Generation. So these are just some examples. So fun little nods to continuity, things like that. And again, these are not things that they break out of the movie to point out to you. There are little things that if you notice them from the previous films, and again, something that the Marvel films do very well. It's, hey, here's this Easter egg, here's this thing. If you remember it, good on you. If not, it's not going to ruin your enjoyment of the movie. Okay. So, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the director. So again, Nicholas Meyer being back, and I think a good choice for this film. What he brings to this is a feeling of continuity. Star Trek has had, at this point, 3 different directors: him, Leonard Nimoy, and William Shatner, and the guy who did the motion picture, which I don't mean to dismiss, but I'm dismissing it. And for 2 of those guys, it was their first film. And I think for the last one, you need that comfort zone. You need ego to be taken out of it, and you need the overall story to be the focus. And I think he was the right guy to do it. This film feels comfortable in the directing. Everything about it feels like a great adventure, and somewhere that you're safe being, because that's what they want the audience to feel like. You know this place, you know these characters, you know the situation. Let's go on one last great ride together. His wonderful little visual touch of staging group shots to look like family portraits happens again. And again, it's a welcome thing in this film, because you're saying goodbye to the family. The last shot of the movie is all of them on the bridge of the Enterprise in a family portrait. They talk to Sulu on the view screen, and his crew is assembled around him like a new family portrait. So that, I think those are really great touches. That being said, I feel like Wrath of Khan was still a better directed film. I think there are some things in this one that are a little shaky. Some of the special effects shots are iffy. But again, it'd been almost 10 years since Star Trek II, so there were new special effects that were out. The whole thing about, a person, the split screen, so you can have one person playing 2 characters at the same time. And they have that, and it looks really bad. I mean, it didn't look that bad when they did The Parent Trap back in the 60s, for God's sakes. But still. So little things like that. There are some continuity issues, not in the nitpicky Star Trek fan way, though there are some of those. More in the nitpicky CinemaSins kind of way. There's a character sitting in one place, a shot happens here where you get a close-up of Kirk, you cut back and Chekhov has moved across the room. Little things like that. There's some that happen in every movie, but there's some minor continuity errors in it that you're just kind of like, eh. I think if this movie has a real flaw, if there's a problem with it, I think it is, like I mentioned before, that its villains are much too broadly drawn. As I said, you know who the bad guys are in this. It's simple, it's obvious from the moment they step on screen. And that's not bad. That's not bad. But hearing kind of how much they wanted to put into these characters, the metaphors they were trying to explore with them, the ideology they were trying to represent, by drawing the characters so broad and making them so obvious, I think it detracted from the message they were trying to get across. You know, maybe they should have introduced a new character to be the bad guy. Maybe they could have gone back into the movies or the television show and found a character from there and have them be the bad guy. You know, someone we've known and trusted, as opposed to here's this new person who is clearly up to something. You know, I don't know. Again, it's not a bad thing, but it is noticeable. And again, especially when they wanted them to be these great representations and they're not, they're just Star Trek baddies. It still makes an entertaining movie. It does have a few minor Trek nerd things, but the one I want to talk about real quick is actually a little bit of a problem I've gained with the title of this movie, The Undiscovered Country. The Undiscovered Country is a reference to a line from Hamlet. And in this film, the Undiscovered Country is meant to represent the future. It is the place where we will all live once we've moved past where we are now. According, based on the interpretation of this film. Problem is, that is not what that line means in Hamlet. For those who don't know, the line about the undiscovered country in Hamlet is part of Hamlet's famous to be or not to be speech. And as anybody knows who's taken my intro to theater class, the to be or not to be speech is about death and questioning what happens next, that he's contemplating suicide. And the line about the undiscovered country, he's not talking about the future, he's talking about the afterlife. The undiscovered country from whose shores no man returns, or no sailor returns. I forget the exact wording. So you're misquoting. And the fact that doesn't bug me so much as the fact is you have several Shakespearean actors in your cast and not one of them said, hey, it's just a minor thing that kind of bugs me. But that being said, I do think it's one of the best titles for a Star Trek film. I love the name, The Undiscovered Country. It sounds so mysterious, and in the context of what they're trying to do in the film, it works incredibly well. I came of age with what I refer to as the golden age of Trek. Next Gen, DS9, Voyager. That's where I am firmly planted. And the original series was always this thing to the side, the setup, the opening act for what I felt were the best examples of Trek. So I never had a huge emotional connection to it. But even that being true, I do find this, in terms of final chapters, saying goodbyes, I do think this is probably one of the best examples. I think it's one of the ones that a lot of film series, a lot of shows have tried to live up to and don't quite get there. I think it's a satisfactory ending. It's the last adventure you would expect these people to have. It ends in a very satisfying way, in a hopeful way, just as the series had always tried to impart. In a way that leaves you a little choked up. Not weeping, but you feel good for them and you feel good for yourself. And you can see that it's had influence on, future films. Everybody loves the end credits of Endgame, which are awesome. But that thing where they show the original Avengers and they're all doing their signature? That's how this one ends. They all sign and you see their signature come out. It's really great. So yeah, I think this is one of my favorite Trek movies. I'd say it's my second favorite after Voyage Home. I think this is a fun film, a thoughtful film, and a perfect bridging between two parts of a legend. It's a great way to say goodbye to the original cast. If you want a sense of this film, go watch the teaser trailer. It's on YouTube. Go watch the teaser trailer. It sums everything up beautifully. So, that's my 2 cents. But, as the poet Semisonic once wrote, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. And while, yes indeed, the original crew of the Starship Enterprise have quite literally ridden off into the sunset, the sun rises on a new generation, a next generation, if I may. So the future of the Trek films, as Kirk so eloquently puts it in his last captain's log, will now become the responsibility of another crew, and they shall finish the journeys we began, journeying to all the undiscovered countries, boldly going where no man, where no one has gone before. But with all things, there must be a passing of the torch. And for that to happen, it means generations are going to have to collide. And we will visit that next time when we look at Star Trek Generations. So thank you for joining me. As always, live long and prosper, and drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.